let's explore the exam requirements with respect to the internal control systems. Overall, we have got 5 different types of exam requirements. The first exam requirement could be list or explain 3 or 4 control objectives, let's say of the sales system, list 4 control objectives of the purchase system, 4 objectives of the bank and cash system, 4 objectives of the inventory system. This first requirement is a knowledge-based requirement. So this particular first requirement has got nothing to do with the scenario of the question. So it's a complete knowledge-based requirement. Let's explore the more important and more tricky exam requirements. The exam requirement number 2, which is a must exam requirement in the exam, is you have to explain 5, 6, 7 or 8 weaknesses or deficiencies in the company's system. So the examiner is going to give you a system, for example, sales system. You as a student are going to read that particular system. Once you are going to read that particular system, you will realize that there are certain loopholes, certain flaws, certain deficiencies in the system. Once you are going to identify or realize that there are deficiencies in the system, as a student, you got to explain those deficiencies. If you are going to identify the deficiency, it will give you half mark. And this identification will be performed by you from the question itself. So you don't have to be creative here. The identification of deficiency will give you half mark, and this identification will be from the question itself. So you don't have to be creative. The identification process is from the question itself. Then you have to do what? You have to explain the deficiency. And in order to explain, you have to use your words. I will tell you how to explain it. But for now, the marking scheme is that you will get another half mark when you are going to explain it. So the identification of deficiency will give you half mark, and it is straight away out of the question. Then you have to explain it, and that is going to give you another half mark. Overall, the examiner uses the word describe 8 deficiencies. So what do we mean by description? What do we mean by explain or describe 8 deficiencies? It means the identification and then the explanation. Okay. Let's recall that example again. So the examiner has given you, let's say, a sales system, and out of this sales system, you have identified and explained, let's say, 8 deficiencies. The examiner is not going to stop here. The examiner now expects that if you have identified the deficiencies and if you have explained them, you as a student, as an external auditor, should be that much skilled that you should be able to address those deficiencies. Now, what do we mean by we should be able to address those deficiencies? It means you should be able to come up with recommendations. Now, what do we mean by recommendations? Recommendations means you have to give an idea to improve that particular deficiency which you identified. So your recommendation has got a direct relation with what? With the deficiency you identified. You have to come up with a recommendation in order to do what? In order to improve. We want to improve. We want to overcome. We want to overcome that particular deficiency. So the second requirement which the examiner is going to ask you, that all those deficiencies which you identified, now tell me how the company is going to overcome all those deficiencies. So the second requirement with respect to the application side is, let's ignore the knowledge based. For the application side, the second requirement would be the examiner is going to ask you to come up with recommendations. What do we mean by recommendations? We have to overcome those deficiencies. Okay. On this note, we have realized one thing, that these 2 requirements, the requirement 2 and the requirement 3, they will be tested as a pair. definitely they will be tested as a pair, because the examiner is going to give us a story. We will identify the deficiencies. Then we got to explain those deficiencies. Once we have scored, let's say, full marks for this one, we have to come up with the recommendations to improve those deficiencies. So this requirement 2 and 3 will be tested as a pair. Okay, let's go to the requirement number. Let's skip this particular requirement number 4 for a minute or so, and let's go to the requirement number 5. The examiner might ask you to identify and explain, let's say, 5 deficiencies. Requirement number 2. So you have identified and explained 5 deficiencies, 5 marks. Okay. Next, the examiner is definitely going to ask you to come up with 5 recommendations in order to overcome those deficiencies, another 5 marks. For one recommendation is going to give you what? It is going to 1 mark per recommendation. So the examiner is going to ask you, okay, fine, you have recommended certain controls, you have recommended the methodologies to address the deficiencies, okay, fine. But now let's imagine, let's assume that management have designed those recommendations. Management have implemented those recommendations. Let's assume for a minute that all those recommendations which you recommended, management has designed and implemented all that stuff. Now, are you going to trust them on their words that we have designed and implemented all those recommendations? No, not really. So you have to come up with a thing called test of control. So this requirement number 5 is test of control. And what do we mean by test of control? Test of control means that we need to test whether the controls are operating effectively or not. So test of control means we have to evaluate whether the controls are operating effectively or they are not operating effectively. So we got to evaluate. So what do we mean by test of control? I need to test whether the control is operating effectively or not. Let's assume there was no security guard outside the bank. It's a deficiency. I recommended there should be a security guard along with the CCTV cameras. Okay, fine. The management has listened to me. Hopefully they will apply that. Now I need to test it, whether they have applied or not. Maybe I would like to visit the bank. I would like to visit that particular branch and I would like to observe whether there is a security guard outside or not. So we have to come up with test of control. This test of control could be tested along with the requirement 2, 3. So the examiner could come up with this 2, this 3 along with 5. One story, but 3 different requirements. First of all, you got to identify the deficiencies out of the system and you have to explain them. Then you have to tell me the ways through which we can overcome those deficiencies. Then last but not the least, assuming your recommendations have been implemented, you got to test them. So things are quite interrelated. This is not difficult. This is a very easy topic and the past paper questions are very easy. I will explain the tricks and the techniques which are going to help you. Apparently, for now, these requirements may seem overwhelming, but with the passage of time, you will realize that it is not difficult at all. Trust me on that.